"And to my distant niece, Miss Agnes Periwinkle," the lawyer intoned, a barely concealed smirk playing on his lips as he read from the late billionaire Alistair Blackwood's will, "I bequeath my heartfelt condolences on her continued simple existence." A wave of snickers rippled through the opulent drawing room, filled with Blackwood's grasping, elegantly dressed relatives. Agnes, 45, in her plain, mended dress, clutching a worn handbag, flushed but said nothing. The lawyer continued, building to the main bequests. He had no idea the next clause would wipe the smirks off every face in the room, leaving Agnes Periwinkle, the simple woman, as the sole inheritor of the entire Blackwood fortune. If you believe true worth is often hidden in plain sight, type quiet power below. Agnes Periwinkle lived a life deliberately tucked away from the glittering, often cruel world of her estranged uncle, Alistair Blackwood. While he amassed a global empire built on ruthless acquisitions and ostentatious displays of wealth, Agnes found solace and purpose in the quiet rhythms of her small cottage in a forgotten country village. She tended her overflowing garden, volunteered at the local animal shelter, and mended her own clothes with a skill born of necessity and a gentle appreciation for making things last. Her hands, though often soil-stained, were capable and kind. She was not simple in intellect, as her uncle and his coterie often implied, with thinly veiled condescension on the rare occasions their paths crossed, but simple in her desires: peace, kindness, a good book, and the company of her rescue cat, Marmalade. She had seen Alistair Blackwood perhaps 5 times in her entire adult life, each encounter a stiff, awkward affair where his eyes would sweep over her plain attire and quiet demeanor with a mixture of pity and disdain. He'd once remarked to his third wife, a woman dripping in diamonds, "Agnes, dear girl, has all the financial acumen of a field mouse. Best she stays in her little burrow." Agnes had heard, and though it stung, she had simply offered a polite, enigmatic smile and retreated further into her chosen life, far from their gilded cages. The news of Alistair's sudden death, followed by a curt summons from his lawyers to attend the reading of the will, had been a surprise. She hadn't expected to be mentioned at all, let alone required to attend. She'd chosen her best dress, a modest, dark blue linen number she'd made herself years ago, carefully mended at the cuff, packed a small overnight bag with a book and a change of clothes, and taken the slow train to the city, feeling like an alien creature entering a foreign ecosystem. The Blackwood ancestral mansion was an exercise in opulent, almost vulgar grandeur. Marble statues lined the cavernous hallways, priceless and often tasteless art adorned every wall, and the air hummed with the barely suppressed avarice of the assembled relatives. Agnes recognized a few faces from newspaper society pages. Alistair's 3 ex-wives, each looking younger and more surgically enhanced than the last. His 2 slick, entitled sons from his first marriage, already mentally carving up the estate. A gaggle of grasping cousins, nieces, and nephews she'd never met, all dressed in expensive mourning attire that did little to conceal their eager anticipation. They surveyed Agnes, who sat quietly in a corner of the enormous drawing room, with open curiosity and ill-disguised contempt. Her simple dress, her worn handbag, her lack of expensive jewelry, marked her as an outsider, an anomaly. Perhaps a slightly embarrassing distant relation dredged up for some minor sentimental bequest. Whispers followed her like shadows. "Who is that drab little thing?" "Alistair's charity case, I expect. Probably gets his stamp collection." The family lawyer, Mr. Sneed, a man whose starched collar seemed as stiff as his personality, presided over the reading with a solemnity that felt entirely feigned. He clearly enjoyed the drama, the power he wielded as the temporary gatekeeper of Alistair Blackwood's vast fortune. He began with the smaller bequests, a pittance to a former chauffeur, a token sum to a distant charity, likely for tax purposes, then the deliberately cruel aside to Agnes about her simple existence, which drew appreciative chuckles from the vulture-like relatives. Agnes endured it with quiet composure, her gaze fixed on a point just beyond Mr. Sneed's shoulder, her expression unreadable. She had expected little, and this theatrical cruelty was in its own way a confirmation of her uncle's character and her wisdom in keeping her distance. The main event, the division of the bulk of the estate, the global corporation, the real estate portfolio, the art collection, the offshore accounts, was what everyone was truly waiting for. Mr. Sneed cleared his throat, a self-important pause before the crescendo. "And now," he announced, his voice resonating with false gravity, "we come to the disposition of the residual estate, encompassing all remaining assets, properties, and holdings of Blackwood Global Enterprises." A collective intake of breath, a rustle of expensive silks and wools filled the room. The sons, Alistair Jr. and Bartholomew, leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of greed and entitlement. The ex-wives adjusted their veils, their eyes sharp and calculating. "To my beloved sons, Alistair Jr. and Bartholomew Blackwood," Sneed read, and the sons preened, "who have always demonstrated such unique approaches to fiduciary responsibility, I bequeath my extensive collection of antique cuckoo clocks with the hope that they might finally learn the value of time well spent and perhaps punctuality." A stunned silence, then a choked gasp from Alistair Jr. Bartholomew's face turned a mottled purple. Cuckoo clocks, cuckoo clocks. It was a deliberate public insult, a final twist of the knife from their domineering father. Mr. Sneed, barely suppressing a smirk now, continued. "To my esteemed ex-wives, Serafina, Morgana, and Tiffany, whose devotion to my person was always so evident, especially during settlement negotiations, I leave my collection of vintage designer handbags. May they carry them in good health, preferably far away from my memory." The ex-wives looked aghast, their carefully constructed composure cracking. Handbags? After years of enduring his ego? The room was now buzzing with shocked whispers, the earlier amusement replaced by disbelief and dawning horror among the principal claimants. What was Alistair playing at? This was a farce. Agnes watched, still quiet, a tiny, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. She had known her uncle was a cruel man, but she hadn't realized the depths of his posthumous theatricality. Mr. Sneed let the chaos simmer for a moment, then held up a hand for silence, clearly relishing his role. "And now," he said, his voice dropping to a dramatic hush, "for the primary beneficiary, the inheritor of the entirety of the Blackwood Global fortune, including all stocks, bonds, properties real and personal, trusts, and controlling interest in all subsidiary companies. Every eye was on him, every breath held. I bequeath the whole damn thing, Mr. Sneed read, his voice now laced with an astonishment that seemed for the first time genuine, "to the only member of my extended family who never asked me for a damned thing, who never schemed, never flattered, never pretended to like me, and who probably has more common sense and integrity in her little finger than the rest of you conniving jackals have in your entire Botoxed bodies combined. My niece, Miss Agnes Periwinkle of Little Hangleton, presently residing." He paused, looking directly at Agnes over the top of his spectacles, his own carefully constructed composure finally shattering into open disbelief. "Miss Periwinkle, it appears you have inherited everything. Absolutely everything." A collective, explosive gasp ripped through the drawing room. For a moment there was utter, disbelieving silence, then pandemonium. Alistair Jr. leaped to his feet, shouting, "This is an outrage. He was senile. We'll contest this. This is preposterous." Bartholomew was sputtering incoherently. Serafina shrieked, That gardener inherits everything." Morgana looked faint, and Tiffany was already on her phone, presumably to her own lawyer. The room descended into a cacophony of outrage, disbelief, and frantic accusations. Through it all, Agnes Periwinkle sat perfectly still, her expression calm, almost serene. The only outward sign of her reaction was a slight widening of her eyes and the slow, deliberate placement of her worn handbag onto her lap. Mr. Sneed, still looking stunned, simply handed the will document towards her. "Miss Periwinkle, it seems congratulations are in order, or perhaps condolences given this family." Agnes took the thick vellum document, her small, capable hands surprisingly steady. She didn't look at her enraged, sputtering relatives. She looked at Mr. Sneed. "Mr. Sneed," she said, her voice still quiet but now imbued with an undeniable, if understated, authority. "Are there any further Preliminary matters? Or may we proceed to the administration of the estate? I have a train to catch this evening, and Marmalade will be expecting his dinner. The ensuing weeks were a whirlwind, though Agnes navigated them with the same quiet composure she had displayed at the will reading. Blackwood's sons and ex-wives, true to form, immediately launched a series of frivolous, spiteful lawsuits contesting the will, alleging undue influence, diminished capacity, everything they could think of. They hired the most aggressive lawyers money could buy. They underestimated Agnes Periwinkle again. She didn't hire a flashy legal team. Instead, she engaged a small, highly respected firm known for its meticulous, ethical, and incredibly effective work. A firm she had quietly researched years ago, just in case. More surprisingly to everyone, she took an active, intelligent role in her own defense, her years of quiet observation and extensive reading having given her a surprisingly sharp understanding of legal principles. She provided her lawyers with obscure family correspondence, old journals of her uncle's, which he had oddly sent her years ago, perhaps in a moment of lonely contrition, and insights into his complex, often contradictory character that proved invaluable in dismantling the contestants' claims. One by one, their lawsuits crumbled, exposed as baseless and driven by greed. During one particularly contentious deposition where Alistair Jr., his lawyer, was attempting to paint Agnes as a naive, easily manipulated simpleton, Agnes quietly quoted, verbatim, a passage from Plato's Republic on the nature of justice, then politely asked the lawyer if he found its application relevant to his current line of questioning. The lawyer, stunned into silence, quickly moved on. The legal battles, predicted by many to last years, were largely resolved in Agnes's favor within 6 months. The simple woman had an iron will and a mind like a steel trap, cloaked in a gardener's calm. Once the estate was settled, Agnes Periwinkle did not transform into a replica of her uncle or his grasping relatives. She did not buy a mega yacht or a string of penthouses. She continued to live in her small cottage in Little Hangleton, though she did have the leaky roof fixed and a proper fence installed for Marmalade. The first major act of the new head of Blackwood Global Enterprises was to establish the Alistair Blackwood Foundation for the promotion of ethical business practices and environmental remediation, funded by a significant portion of the profits from her uncle's most rapacious ventures. She then began a systematic review of all of Blackwood Global's holdings, quietly divesting from exploitative industries, investing in sustainable alternatives, and implementing fair wage and employee welfare programs that sent shockwaves through the corporate world. Agnes appointed a board of highly competent ethical individuals, including, surprisingly, a reformed and deeply humbled Mr. Sneed as a legal advisor, to manage the day-to-day operations of the foundation and the restructured company, retaining final oversight, but preferring to focus on strategy and impact rather than the minutiae of boardrooms. She rarely gave interviews, and when she did, she spoke quietly but eloquently about the responsibility that came with wealth, about stewardship rather than ownership, about using resources to heal rather than to hoard. The society pages that had once mocked her simple dress now clamored for a glimpse of the enigmatic philanthropist of Little Hangleton. She usually declined, preferring the company of her cat and her roses. Her cousins, sons, and ex-wives of Alistair Blackwood, their legal challenges exhausted and their own finances diminished by legal fees, faded into obscurity, their lavish lifestyles curtailed, left with only their cuckoo clocks and designer handbags as bitter reminders of what they had lost through their own greed and misjudgment. Agnes Periwinkle, the woman they had dismissed as a drab little thing, a field mouse, proved to be the shrewdest, most capable, and ultimately the most transformative Blackwood of them all. She demonstrated that true strength isn't loud, true intelligence isn't arrogant, and true wealth isn't measured in possessions but in purpose. Her inheritance wasn't just a fortune, it was an opportunity, one she seized with quiet grace and unshakable integrity, proving that sometimes the simplest souls possess the most profound wisdom, and the greatest power lies not in what you acquire, but in what you choose to do with it. Because in the grand theater of life, the most overlooked characters often deliver the most surprising and impactful final acts. Subscribe to this channel if you believe that true worth often whispers, and that the quietest among us can change the world.